Hello, and welcome to The Mind of a Therapist, a podcast where I interview psychotherapists and helping professionals and what they're passionate about in order to provide you with messages of encouragement and hope. I'm your host, Andrew Earl. The Mind of a Therapist is sponsored by Psychological Counseling Services, healing hearts and transforming lives. Look into our intensive at pcsearl.com. In today's interview, I interviewed Joe Sanok. Joe Sanok is a speaker, former mental health counselor, business consultant, and podcaster. Joe has the #1 podcast for counselors, the Practice of the Practice podcast. He's a writer for Psych Central, and he's been featured on the Huffington Post, Forbes, Good Magazine, Reader's Digest, Bustle, and Yahoo News. He's a keynote speaker, author of 5 books, and is a top consultant. So without further ado, here's Joe Sanok. So Joe, I know that you have a background in working with couples and adolescents, and I'm wondering if you could just talk to our listeners a little bit about your work historically.
Yeah, so I've been working with different people in therapy settings since 1997 is when I first got a job, and actually no, it was 98, a job at a runaway shelter, because I had this idea that I wanted to work with angry teens and thought, before I go get a full degree in that, maybe I should, actually do that work. So loved the work. I loved the challenge of kind of building trust with teenagers, and then had a great therapeutic career in helping couples, wrote some books around kind of how to raise kids and how to set boundaries, especially on really difficult kids. For a while, I had a therapeutic sailing program where we took at-risk kids out sailing and did therapy right on the sailboat for 5 years on this 50-foot wooden Concordia cutter that was like a giant pirate ship. And then these kids learned to sail it and did therapy on the sailboat. But then in 2019, I sold my counseling practice, and now I consult primarily with people that own private practices and that are starting podcasts.
And what prompted that shift for you?
Yeah, in 2012, I started blogging and podcasting about what I was learning in my private practice. So at that time, I was working at a community college and had really just a side gig private practice, and it was going relatively well, but it was mostly to pay off student loan debt. And I started to just blog about that and podcast about what I was learning. So I'd read a book and talk about it, interview somebody and apply it to private practice, because I never had a business class. And so I have all these skills in the therapy world, but now I'm supposed to run a business. Like, how does that work? And so
Sure.
There weren't any podcasts at the time that were about private practice and kind of the business of it. So, right away, day one, we were #1. So,
Nice.
but then, really, there's a lot of podcasts that came after that. And so a lot of them turned to me during that time. And there's this kind of whole cohort of awesome podcasters and consultants around that space. And I remember the day I ran over to my private practice to do a lunch appointment from the community college, did an appointment over my lunch hour. At that time, I had a corner office, view of the bay private practice for my quote side gig. It's this 4-office suite. I think I had 6 or 7 people working for me there while I still was full-time over at the community college. And I went back to the college, walking in from the parking lot and walk into my basement office with no windows. And just the dichotomy between the two was so pronounced. And I just realized I was making more off my side gig. It was what I really loved, and I could work less. So I left that job 5 or 6 years ago. And then even within that, I realized that the shift towards consulting and being kind of more on a national scale and, helping people was really what I enjoyed doing the most. Because if I can help one person add, say, 3 clinicians, that's, 3 times more mental health services.
Sure.
And then that impact of, 20 to 30 people per caseload, I mean, that's 100 people just with that one person that's been affected. And so if we can do that with, thousands, or in our case, 100,000 listeners a month, that's a huge impact to take these skills and have them not just be kind of localized.
Absolutely. And especially right now, with all the physical distancing that's in place with COVID-19, I mean, it's just so important that we have a plethora of mental health professionals that are good at reaching out to people with these forums, podcasts, and all the technologies that we have. I'm curious with your clinical experience. I know that a lot of families right now are experiencing some big shifts. There's probably more stress for couples, for teens. I know my neighbor was talking about her kids are home from school, and she's been kind of dealing with some challenges of them taking responsibility to do homework. So I guess maybe starting off there with parents who have kids right now, what are some pieces of advice you might give them?
Yeah, I would start with that a child's brain is best going to be able to work on any sort of academic things if they're grounded, if they're not stressed, and if they're in a family where they feel safe. So if we even just start with, what are you doing as a parent to ground yourself? What are you doing as a parent to demonstrate ongoing learning? Or are you freaking out? Are you on the news? Are you, on Facebook and Instagram and doing all these things to distract yourself from the reality of the world we're in right now? Well, that's going to carry over into your kids. And so the best first step I would give is really figure out in your own self. So what does that look like for me personally? This morning I had a meeting that usually I have on Skype with my assistant that's in Cape Town, and I just texted her and said, "Hey, can we do a walking meeting? It's beautiful outside. I want to get some sunshine. Unless there's something I need to see on a screen, can I just do a walking meeting?" And she's like, "That's fine." So we did our half-hour meeting while I was walking. So I got in some good physical exercise, not just for myself, but my kids then see Daddy's out on a walk and he's doing something for himself to be outside. Then I worked on a Malcolm Gladwell course that I'm taking right now to learn how to write better. And so they see me when I go and do that, and they do their education. So, they'll watch a video about space. They've been really into space and how did planets form. And so, okay, so you're going to do like a 10-minute video there, and then we'll ask a question and do another 10-minute video. And you'll see me learning, taking notes next to you. So I'm co-learning with them. This morning I did meditation, and I invited them to join me if they wanted to. If they didn't, that's okay. But that helps me stay grounded. And so really identifying yourself, what do you need? Next, I think family communication on a daily basis is really important. And so even just my wife and I looking at my schedule each day, being able to say, okay, there's a block here when I'm not in the middle of something. And so, for example, today, I had about an hour and a half gap between my last podcast interview and this one. And I said to my wife, do you want me helping with the kids? Or I'd really like to get through some emails and some other things. And she's like, that's fine, I got them. But there's other days she may just say, like, I need you down here. And so on a daily basis, kind of going through the schedule. And then even just saying with each person, what's your 10 for today? So a typical day might look like, if I don't have as much work, okay, my wife might say, I'd love for us to go for a family hike. I might say, I would love for us as a family to meditate together. My 5-year-old might say, I want us all to color something together. And, my 8-year-old might say, let's play Mario Kart. And so, okay, so if we all get one thing we like today, it's a lot easier when I say, okay, we got to rally and clean the house. Okay, we got to rally and do our homework. It's time to cook dinner. Stay out of my hair while I'm doing it. Because everyone felt like they got a little bit of what they wanted. And then I think the last thing that I would recommend is having, especially if you're having some troubles with your kids' behavior, even if you've lightened up a little bit, even if you feel like you've set some good expectations, there is a time for some clear positive and negative consequences. And so with younger kids, like our 5 and 8-year-old, we've implemented a point system, and it keeps getting a little more and more refined. But it's like when they say yes, and I say, hey, can you go do that? And they say yes. I'll often say, you get a point. And then they kind of add it up through the day. If they are snarky, okay, you just lost a point. I don't want to do that the rest of their lives, where all of their kind of good behavior comes from outside of themselves. There's something inside that they need to develop. But for right now, like, they need to know that's not okay. And then for them to even ask for iPad time, they have to have at least 3 points. If we're going to do a movie, they have to have at least 5 points. And if they want to choose the movie, they have to be at least 10 points each of them. And so it then is a way that we can kind of say, okay, you're doing really well today, or hey, we need to really kind of get your behavior under control.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially at that younger age, to have those consequences there. And at the same time, though, I was hearing a lot of collaboration. What do you want to do today? What are you excited about? And then finding those things that are grounding to us, grounding to the adult, so that we can then be our best selves, with our children. How about for couples? I know that this time can, like, a lot of people who are out working are now at home, and there can be additional stress with having the kids around. Financial stress is a real issue for a lot of people right now. So I think that those are all kind of breeding grounds for relational conflicts with couples. What sort of ideas do you have for couples outside of that grounding piece that you were mentioning?
Yeah, I think right now, whatever issues were already there are going to be magnified. So just like if there's cracks in, a rock or a cliff, and then water gets in there and then freezes, it's going to expand and make that crack bigger. Anything positive will probably be better. You'll be better at those things, and anything negative is going to be more expanded. So, really understanding it's going to come out in some weird ways. And so bedtime for our girls, which, and I know this is about couples for this section, but their behavior sometimes comes out in behavior during the day. Sometimes it comes out with all of a sudden irrational fears at night that they've never had, or regression in, our 5-year-old has had great bedtimes and all of a sudden she's scared of things. And, our 8-year-old has said, I'm scared that I'm going to have dreams about coronavirus. And so it's going to come out in weird ways with our kids, and it's going to come out in weird ways as a couple. And so the more that we can say, okay, what are the main domains that matter to us? For me, it's having some sort of ongoing connection, more than just feeling like we're roommates. And this is true outside of even just coronavirus.
Sure.
But to say, like, now we need to be more intentional. And so I'll articulate. So we've been going through John and Julie Gottman's The 8 Dates book. Now it's a great book. And usually we would weekly go out on a date, but we're not going to do that now. And so to even say to the girls, we're going on a date, we're going to sit in the den with the fireplace on, and we're going to be in here for about an hour. Unless it's a major thing, please let us just talk. We need to connect. So we're demonstrating to them what healthy relationships look like, and figuring out what are some of those just like non-negotiables. So for us, we need to connect emotionally on a somewhat regular basis. We haven't defined that as a specific number of hours or anything, but I think it when you're not connecting. I think making sure that you're collaborating and communicating. And we have ongoing therapy. Actually, after this podcast interview, we're meeting with our therapist online. I think if ever there's been a time to meet with a couples therapist, it's right now. A lot of people are saying, oh, I'm just going to hunker down. And it's like, no, this is when we need therapists the most. And onlinetherapy.com is a great place to search out a therapist that is trained in online therapy, and just a huge number of quality therapists on there. Clay Cockrell, who started it, is a therapist from New York, and he does online therapy. He's been on Good Morning America and a number of things, and just a great guy that is providing an amazing service. He's even letting therapists be on there for free right now, just to get the word out about online counseling.
Wow, yeah, I love that idea of, I've heard the language used, social distancing. That's kind of like the mainstream discourse, but I've heard the word like physical distancing used, So although we're not physically able to connect with our therapists, mental health providers, or even friends and family too, we still have, more than ever, we really need to be socially connecting. And then also, I love that creativity that you're using with your wife to set aside time. It's like, okay, we're not going to be going out to a restaurant or going out for these typical dates, but we're still going to carve out that time for the relationship.
Yeah, and I mean, it's going to expose how good your parenting is too. That we're going to be going into our therapy session in 45 minutes, and we need to not be interrupted during that. And so if our kids don't have 3 points, they're not going to get to be doing the iPad during that time. And so they have to be able to occupy themselves. So we have kids that luckily we've been good about not having them have all of their entertainment be on an iPad. Now, some people this may reveal, wow, I'm really dependent on the iPad for my kids. My kids can't go outside and play without me being right there with them. So it's going to expose things that are a great opportunity for you to work through. If your kids, depending on where you live, if your kids can't occupy themselves, that's a problem. And so figuring out how do we kind of pull them away from technology, build that creativity, learn some new board games or card games. Those are all really great opportunities right now. Even finding fun in your own life. My brother just showed me this app that we can text back and forth and basically play beer pong with each other, and it's like this fun thing. He takes a move, then I take a move. It's like, we're not doing the drinking side of it, as we play,
Uh,
but just to do something that's a little bit different and to
hmm.
think through things differently. Like, how do you connect with friends in a way that's silly, different ways? That's so important. Tonight I have improv practice, but it's on Zoom. And so that's going to like make me forget that I'm in the middle of a pandemic and I
Hmm.
need that healthy social escape, even if I'm still just in my own basement.
Mm. Absolutely. I was just reminded when you were talking, one of my friends on Facebook did it's like a Facebook Live talent show. And so people are gonna be
That's
juggling, playing the guitar. So that's the piece with this that I've seen a lot of people really reaching out, and like my family, for example, recently we did a with our extended family, we did a Zoom chat. It was like the Brady Bunch with everyone's picture up. But it's nice to see people reaching out and connecting and creating that for themselves in this time.
Well, and I agree. And I think that there's a whole new art form that's going to develop out of this of how people
Mm.
have creatively used things like Zoom. Like, even I was talking to a local musician who he obviously can't play any gigs right now. And so thinking about, well, what are the core reasons you play music? It's not just that you like music, it's that you have a heart for social justice. You love seeing people come together and you're solving the problem of loneliness and lack of community. Music has been your modality for how you've operated, but that core belief and core pains that you're helping overcome are are still there. So how would you do that in Zoom? And so coming up with, well, what would a musical experience look like? Maybe you talk about a song and why you wrote it, and then you play the song, and then you break strangers up into small groups of 3 or 4 to have discussions about it. There can be new modalities that we develop that, like, you could never do that at a music festival where it's like, okay, everybody go talk to a stranger about that song we just heard. Like, no, everyone would group together with their friends they came with. And so now Zoom allows us to just force strangers to talk to each other. And so there could be, if we allow ourselves to have, some sort of optimism within a very difficult time, those flowers that are growing in a concrete field,
Mm.
that breathe new life into humanity in a way that couldn't have happened had we not gone through this.
Hmm. I love that image. The flowers growing in the through the cracks of the concrete. Mm.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm sure I
mm.
heard that from someone and stole it, but I can't cite my source.
Yeah, that's good. So how about I'm imagining a lot of people who've been experiencing anxiety and depression are seeing that those feelings are really growing. What sort of ideas do you have for those folks coping with anxiety, coping with depression?
Yeah, I think the very biggest thing that, even outside of something like this, but it's obviously enhanced even more, is understanding there are so many things that we have absolutely zero control over. That whole, accept the things you can change, let go of the things that you can't change, and have the wisdom to know the difference between the two. Right now is more important than ever. And so for you, it might be that you're going to give yourself five minutes a day, that you're going to go on Apple News and you're going to read through things just to make sure there's nothing major. Or you might have a friend that really reads the news well and is a good source of information, and just tell that person, I'm going to not be on the news. Would you mind just sending me any major things that you think I need to know? So for example, I have a brother-in-law who he's an MD. Weeks ago, before Michigan kind of locked down, he and my sister said, "Sorry, we're not going to come to this family gathering. We're locking down as a family." And it was like, "Whoa, that seems a little extreme." And then, we decided to just go along with them, because he's a doctor. My sister's a nurse. Like, they really know how to read things and understand it. And they had access to people that were working in Detroit and New York saying things are taking off, you should lock down. So to have people like that you can say, I can't emotionally handle scrolling through and figuring out what's true and what's not true, with differences between, the CDC and this administration,
Mm.
and all these things, that there's just misinformation everywhere. So finding, where's the amount of information you can take in, what do you have control of, what do you not have control of. I do think also giving yourself permission to not be a perfect human right now. So for example, a number of years ago, my daughter was about to have heart surgery. And I was having breakfast with a friend of mine who was a former hospital social worker, and at the time he was working for the United Way. And he said, one thing I would give as advice to people when I was a hospital social worker was, if you just stopped smoking, take smoking up again. And I'm like, wait, in a hospital, you would give advice to people to start smoking? And he's like, yes, absolutely. Because when you're in the midst of trauma and having your kid go through heart surgery, that's not the time to say, I should eat a salad for lunch. It's a time to say, that cookie looks delicious and I can always work out later, but I have enough emotional baggage going on. And I mean, for me, that might be that I have, Pringles right at the end of the day instead of having pistachios. And I know that pistachios are better for me, but honestly, I don't need one extra thing to put pressure on myself for. I would rather do my best to stay grounded, to meditate, those things that I know are healthy for me, and also have some areas that I can wiggle and just let myself go a little bit.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of I'm a graduate student right now. I'm studying marriage and family therapy, and last night I had a online Zoom course, and we were doing this meditation, and it was a meditation to invite your future self, maybe 10, 30, 40, 50 years older, into a safe place that you created, and then what is that person telling you? And for me, it was like me when I was like 80 years old. I had like a gray beard and just like this warmth, and it was just like, you're okay. Like everything you're doing, it's like you're trying your best. And I think that that's just so powerful to give ourselves grace and allow ourselves to just be at times, because there's so many pressures on us in our society.
Yeah, and a lot of them, when you really break down the fear, are kind of irrational. Now, and I'm not saying that coronavirus and all this is irrational. I just want to make sure I underline that and say that. But, when someone says, I'm scared of losing my job because I'm going to be homeless and then I'm going to die. Like, yes, right now there's a lot of economic, financial issues happening, and there are people that can't make rent, and I fully understand that. But even outside of the current kind of situation, would you get to a point where you just sat there and let yourself get homeless and sat there and let yourself die and wouldn't access resources, or go to a homeless shelter, or go work with a social worker to figure out how to get a new job? Or like, we get so wrapped up in our typical world around the financial struggles that we fear that we don't really think through, like, would I actually let that happen? Now, I think what's going to happen kind of after distancing, AD, I've been saying kind of before Corona and after distancing. So we got our BC and AD. The after distancing, I think we're going to think differently than, I know we're going to think differently. It's just how much are we going to allow ourselves to say, wow, we went through that. Now I need to change myself in a different way than how I was living kind of before Corona.
I was looking through one of the blogs that you had written a couple of years ago, and it was on anxiety and how anxiety affects sleep. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more on maybe some tips for sleep hygiene during this time, because I know that that's so important when it comes to reducing stress, reducing anxiety, reducing depression.
Yeah, and sleep is delightful. I mean, to think about how much, sleep helps you with the way you digest your food, the way you think, the way that you can come up with creative outcomes. There was even a sleep study a number of years back that looked at, I think it was middle school or high school kids in their math curriculum. And the only intervention they did was to help kids get 1 or 2 extra hours of sleep, and they correlated 1 hour of sleep equaling 1 grade that they would go up. So if they were a C student and they got an extra hour of sleep, they became a B student. If they had 2 extra hours of sleep over the period of time, they became an A student. That our brains need that deep sleep to be able to sort through our day. So we want to make sure that we have the length of sleep, but also the depth of sleep. And so some things that get in the way of our depth of sleep is exactly what you say, sleep hygiene. And so what's sleep hygiene? It just means kind of basic things that we know just screw up your sleep in depth and length. And so things like, looking at too much technology right before bed, or even worse, having a TV on, in your bedroom. If you're finding that your depth of sleep isn't good enough, maybe have certain times that you cut off. Most experts say 30 to 60 minutes ahead of time. But, just look at your own patterns. If you're having trouble falling asleep, maybe back off a little bit. Vitamins like melatonin can often help. Of course, consult your own doctor. Having it be a little bit colder environment has statistically shown to help with deeper sleep. And so it could be that instead of wearing full on flannel pajamas, that maybe wear something a little bit lighter. Looking at even your posture. And so for a lot of people, they don't realize just the alignment of their back, between having a light pillow between their knees or a pillow to put their arms around can really help just with their posture so their back doesn't hurt when they wake up. Other things like making sure that it's dark enough in there, that you're waking up and going to bed around the same time can be really helpful. Looking at your caffeine intake. We know the half-life of caffeine is 8 hours, which means if you have a cup of coffee at noon, that at 8 p.m. about half that caffeine is still going to be in your body. And so for most people, they should be cutting off their caffeine by at the latest 2 or 3 in the afternoon, so that they can have a solid night's sleep. Other things are just making sure that you change your lighting. And so we know that the body naturally looks at light like it does the sun. So during the day, you want more overhead light, just like the sun would be. And during the evening, you want more kind of desk lamps and things that are lower to the ground in your living room. And so these kinds of things can really help your brain then have that depth of sleep. We know that there's these things in your brain called ghrelin and melatonin that when it's released, it helps trigger things in your body. As you get older, when that naturally releases, it's your body temperature is dropping. And so we know that the older you are, the earlier in the day that happens. So for a typical teenager, that ghrelin release is around 11 p.m., triggering the body getting colder and saying that it should be going to sleep. So if you push through that and fight through that, you kind of miss your opportunity of when you're naturally going to fall asleep. So you're going to need to learn some progressive muscle relaxation, things like that. Over time, that gets earlier and earlier, which is why, back when people went out to restaurants in Florida, they would start their dinners at 4 p.m. because people naturally in their 70s and 80s have their ghrelin is released much earlier in the day, and thus they start to feel tired earlier. And so even noticing those types of things can be really helpful. Now, if you kind of get into, I have really poor sleep and I don't know like what's happening, whether you have an Apple Watch or there's other apps that can kind of track your breathing to see what some of the problems are in the depth, that can be a really helpful way to get some information without having to go full on to a doctor.
Sure. Well, appreciate all that information. That's super helpful. I know that my wife and I, she's a nutritionist, and so we're all into like these self-care and sleep hygiene is one thing that we've been focusing on lately, and just that screen time, we've been more strict with that, and that's made a huge difference. It just your body starts to get tired. I think whenever I go camping or backpacking, it's like I can stay up a couple hours after the sun goes down, maybe, but the body just starts to wind down.
Campfire starts to finish, and you're just like, oh, it must be like 12. And you're like, it's 8:45.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So another thing I wanted to ask you about is I know I've listened to Practice of the Practice a bit, and I know you developed something called Slow Down School, and I love this idea of just slowing down. I think that in our society it's so fast paced, if you work like 80 hours a week, that's glorified, right? But what kind of repercussions is that having on your body and your relationship? So I'd love to just open up a space for you to talk about that slowing down, maybe what that's looked like in your own life, and then also for people during this time, if you have any other ideas of like what that can look like.
Yeah, thank you. So, I think when we think about how the typical business world and life world is typically structured, we've got kind of the Gary Vaynerchuk hustle, hustle, hustle side, just keep going at it. And there's a lot of people that need a kick in the pants to say, like, stop slacking, go get some stuff done. So it is needed for a time being, but not as a lifestyle. And then on the other side, there's often this kind of woo-woo, give it up to the universe, it'll all bless you and bring back to you, but you don't have to do any work. And so I actually would say that we fall in the middle where the pattern of slowing down creates the best environment for your best work. And so if you think about when you have your best ideas, it's probably when you're sitting around a campfire with nothing else on your mind, or you're taking a shower, or you're out for a drive, and you're not listening to a podcast or music, and your mind just kind of wanders, and you kind of get out of that default mode network of your brain that's been trained for years and years and years to allow parts of your brain to speak to one another where normally it doesn't get to talk to one another. So we try to replicate that with Slow Down School, and the way we do that is this is an in-person event, assuming that things are resolved by the end of July. But, if not, we'll figure out, some way to pivot. And so people come into Traverse City. We pick them up in a big yellow school bus, go out to this place that has a very summer camp feel, but has nice accommodations. And for 2 days, we genuinely slow down because most of the time you show up at a conference, all right, I'm going to go full tilt, and you have all these worries. And did I, put my autoresponder on my email? Oh shoot, is someone going to call me on my cell phone or not? But we want to just say, let's optimize our brains before we put in some work, because we're coming into this conference wanting to work on a podcast, an e-course, our private practice, whatever our thing is. But maybe that's not the best use of your time. Maybe something has to rise to the surface that says this would be a game changer for me. And so we go for hikes, we skip stones, we have a campfire, we bring in massage therapists and yoga teachers. We have an executive chef that they grow their own kale there. I mean, just the salad bar alone is worth the price of entry. They even have little things that say these carrots were grown by these people and have a picture of the people. It's just amazing.
Nice. Love it.
So we do that for a few days, and then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday we work on the businesses. And so we do these sprints. So they're 20-minute sprints where you define what you're going to work on for 20 minutes. You then go do it, and then you reflect on what you just did. And people have got so much done in these sprints. In one 20-minute sprint, this guy, Michael Glavin out of Chicago, sketched out 7 chapters of a book he was working on. So it had the headings, the bullet points. I mean, just his brain was optimized. And in 20 minutes, he got months worth of things done. This other lady, Tara, she named her consulting business, bought the URL, and sketched out her entire first email sequence for it in 20 minutes. And so, I mean, a lot of the businesses that now have really impacted the whole kind of counseling world were launched at Slowdown School. Simplified SEO Consultants, this lady, Jessica Tapana, she at Slowdown School was just helping people with their meta descriptions and SEO. She's a self-described technophobe where she can't even get her smart TV to work. And she figured out, though, how to rank high in Google and was just teaching people. And she had come into Slowdown School thinking, okay, I want to work in my private practice. It's out of St. Louis, and I want to really help more people through my private practice. But then she realized there's something here with this SEO, and she threw it out to the group and said, I've helped a lot of you with kind of SEO. Would that be something that you think is needed in this market? And universally, people were like, yes. And by the end of her time at Slowdown School, I think she had 5 or 6 clients. And now she makes more off of her SEO business, helping therapists rank high in Google, than she does off her group practice. And so when you can clarify, you're kind of open to what's rising to the surface. Maybe these employee issues aren't as important as this big thing that's going to impact the entire counseling world. And so I would say that in my own life, that slowing down to spark innovation is a pattern that I do on a daily basis, but also on a quarterly, annual basis.
And what does that look like on a daily basis for you?
Yeah, so I set very clear boundaries on my time, and not just on my time, but like what I will do. And I want to ask myself, is this something that only Joe Sanok can do? So like if I had sent my assistant Jess to this podcast, I imagine you would have been a little frustrated that I didn't show up, right? So only I can show up and represent myself as the guest, unless you know ahead of time, okay, I'm going to send someone else from my team. In regards to doing my own podcast, that's really something that I need to be the one that does. Now, replying to every one of my emails, Jess can do that on my behalf. She can say, hey, I'm replying for Joe, and getting through the majority of them, except for those ones that have to get to me. And so being able to set boundaries on my time, I'm not going to start before 9 a.m. during this whole quarantine thing because I want to be with my kids. I want to wake up with them and help them get going for the day. I want to be done by 3:30 so that I can play games with them and help them feel safe and grounded and all of those things, while also letting my wife go for a walk or get out of here. You don't have to be a mom all the time. And so also on a weekly basis, I take Mondays and Fridays off. I'm in the midst of writing a book, so I'm doing a little bit of writing on Fridays now, but I work Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And what happens when you set those extreme boundaries, when you get your business going, is that you drop the ball. And that's good. It's good to drop the ball because it exposes the things that are the best use of your time. So if you have 30 hours of work and you only have 17 hours to do it, you're going to spend those 17 hours on the very best things that you need to be doing. And then you might say, okay, I need to outsource all of these other things to someone at $15 an hour because my counseling rate's $125 a session, or my consulting rate's $1,000 an hour. You then can have the best use of your time be for the things that are going to generate the most business, help the most people, and help your bottom line.
No, well, thanks for sharing all that, Joe. So we're kind of coming to the end of our time here. The question I like to pose to guests at the end is, what's a message of hope you want to leave our listeners with?
I think that the biggest hope both in the times that we're in right now, but even when we're after distancing, would just be that you have creative ideas inside of you that the world desperately needs. If you're a therapist and you have a master's degree, only 8% of the United States has a master's degree or higher. So in any group of 100 people, most likely you're the most qualified in mental health. That's not just true to mental health people. It's true to everybody. We all have unique experiences. Me, as a Midwest father of 2 daughters, there's not a whole lot of Midwest fathers of 2 daughters that have a background in psychology. So we all are unique in our own messages. And honestly, the world needs to hear more of it. And I mean, what I'm pushing nowadays is really getting more people to podcast, because it's such a great place where people can continue to kind of get their messages out there and help more people.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much. And if people want to reach out to you, connect with you, where'd be the best place to send them?
Yeah. So if people are interested in learning to podcast, we have a free course we put together over at podcastlaunchschool.com that's going to help you figure out, what would you want your podcast to be about, just kind of the basics of getting one set up. If they want to listen to anything in regards to our podcast, that's over at practiceofthepractice.com. We have a ton of free resources over there as well.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Joe. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Please press the subscribe button, as well as rating and reviewing our podcast. This helps others connect with what you've been hearing. If you have any questions, please contact us at themindofatherapist@gmail.com. These questions will be kept anonymous. I want to thank Eric Price for the wonderful music you hear in this podcast. Additionally, this podcast was created to provide accurate and authoritative information on the subject matter. Although we are interviewing licensed therapists, they are not your therapists. This podcast is not intended to serve as direct medical advice and should not be used as a substitute for direct professional help. It is given with understanding that neither the host, publisher, guests, or PCS are rendering legal, clinical, or other professional information. If you need a professional, we encourage you to find one. Visit Psychology Today to connect with a licensed clinician near you. Lastly, I wanted to mention that Psychological Counseling Services is currently offering teletherapy. If you're interested in therapy at this time, please visit pcsearl.com. As long as there is a state of emergency in place, PCS will be offering teletherapy.